For today's math lesson, we are working on Topic 1, Lesson 6 on page 25 of our Envisions Math Volume 1 workbook. Today's learning intentions are: I can solve word problems that involve how many fewer. So again, we are on page 25 of our workbook page. Let's go ahead and get started. For our solve and share today, it says Amy has 7 stickers. Tim has 5 stickers. Who has fewer stickers? So fewer stickers means who has less. How many fewer? Show how you know. So Amy has 7 stickers. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Tim has 5 stickers. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we knew in our problem when we started, we knew that Amy had 7 and Tim had 5. So we could just look at the numbers to answer this question, but sometimes it's easier to get a picture or a visual of our problem. So Amy has 7 stickers. Tim has 5 stickers. So which number is bigger, 7 or 5? 7. We know that 7 is bigger than 5. So if it asks us who has fewer stickers, well, we know that 5 is a smaller number. So we know that Tim has a smaller amount of stickers. He only has 5 and Amy has 7. And it wants to know how many fewer. So how many less? So in our last couple lessons, we have been working with these problems. So when we draw it out, we can connect and see, okay, well, Amy and Tim both had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stickers, and then Tim ran out. He did not have any more after 5. But Amy had 7, so she had 2 more stickers than Tim. So when it asks us how many fewer did Tim have, Tim did not have 2 more stickers. So he was 2 fewer less than Amy. So for our answer, and you will have to write it, I'm going to go ahead and type it because of my finger. I'm going to say Tim had 2 fewer stickers is what we would say for our answer on our solve and share. Now let's turn our workbook page to page 26. So we're just turning our workbook page over. Let's watch our animated video that shows us how to do the top part of page 26.
Troy has 5 red cars. Barb has 9 green cars. How many fewer cars does Troy have than Barb? 5 is less than 9. Troy has fewer cars. Use cubes to compare. The red cubes stand for Troy's cars. The green cubes stand for Barb's cars. You can count the extra cubes Barb has to find how many fewer cubes Troy has. Drag green cubes to the mat to find out how many fewer cubes Troy has. Troy has fewer cubes.
So we are going to drag our green cubes over until it matches the exact number that Troy has. So I'm going to drag my cubes over until they match. So now these are equal, they match. And I put 4 cubes into this mat over here. So Troy has 4 fewer cubes. So our answer to this question, so when we are finding out how many fewer, we are subtracting. And when we're finding out how many more, we are having to use addition. So in our answer, we could say that they are alike because when we are using both of these methods, we're either adding or subtracting to find out how many fewer or how many more. So for my answer for this one, and you all can just write it as we know, Mrs. Collier is going to type it. So we can say you can subtract or add to find how many fewer or how many more. So we'll say that for our answer, and if you need to pause the video to be able to write that down, go ahead and do so. On our guided practice on the same page, page 26, number 1 says Juan has 8 red crayons. Sue has 2 blue crayons. How many fewer crayons does Sue have than Juan? So let's look at our problem again. Juan has 8 red crayons. Sue has 2 blue crayons. And it wants to know how many fewer crayons does Sue have than Juan? Our subtraction equation is already filled in. We have 8 minus 2 equals 6. And that Sue has 6 fewer crayons. So where did we get these numbers from? Let's look. Juan has 8 red crayons, so I'm going to fill in an 8 here. We're trying to find how many fewer crayons does Sue have than Juan. So we're going to be subtracting. I'm going to write my minus sign. The 2 comes from, I know that Sue only has 2 crayons. So how many fewer crayons does Sue have than Juan? If Sue has 2 and Juan has 8, I know that is going to equal 6. So what we can do to figure this out, because not everyone knows that 8 minus 2 is 6. If you hold up 8 of your fingers and you put 2 of them down, how many are you left with? You are left with 6. We can also look in our picture up here. I can see that there are 8 red crayons and 2 blue crayons. I can see, okay, if I have 2 blue and 2 red, that would equal the same amount as the blue crayons, but how many red do I have left over? So for number 2, Anne has 4 purple grapes and Sam has 7 green grapes. How many fewer grapes does Anne have than Sam? So we're just going to model our subtraction equation just like we did on number 1. So how many purple grapes does Anne have? 4. How many green grapes does Sam have? Sam has 7. How many fewer grapes does Anne have than Sam? So we're going to start our problem with writing how many green grapes Sam has. We are subtracting, so I write my minus sign. How many purple grapes does Anne have? Anne has 4. So 7 minus 4 would equal, well, let's see, I can hold up 7 fingers and I can put 4 of them down and figure it out that way. Or I can say, okay, I know 4 is smaller than 7, so Sam has more grapes. So if I count, okay, Anne has 1, 2, 3, 4 grapes. Sam has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We can also compare, like we've been comparing our pictures. So if I crossed out 1, 2, 3, 4, and I crossed out 4 of his grapes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That still leaves me with 1, 2, 3 extra grapes. So 7 minus 4 is 3. So Anne has 3 fewer grapes than Sam. On page 27 for the independent practice, number 3 says Emma buys 10 red apples. Emma buys 10 red apples. She then buys 5 green apples. How many fewer green apples than red apples does Emma buy? How many fewer green apples than red apples does Emma buy? So Emma bought 10 red apples and only 5 green apples. So how many more red apples does she have than green? So in our problem, when you have to write this up, we are going to write how many red apples Emma bought in this blank. We are subtracting, so write our minus symbol. How many green apples Emma bought. Our equal sign to get our answer, and then what those numbers subtracted would equal. So again, if Emma has 10 red apples and only 5 green apples, how many fewer green apples than red apples does Emma buy? Number 4 says Beth writes on 3 cards. So Beth writes on 3 cards. John writes on 9 cards. How many fewer cards does Beth write on than Joe? So if Beth wrote on 3 cards and Joe writes on 9 cards, we know that 3 is a smaller number than 9. We know that 9 is a bigger number than 3, correct? So how many fewer cards does Beth write on than Joe? So in my first blank, I would need to write the total number of cards that Joe writes on. So how many cards did Joe write on? I would then write my subtraction symbol, so my minus. How many cards did Beth write on? Equals, then that would be your answer. So like how we compared our apples here, you can also compare our sticky notes using our numbers, or you can use the pictures. So I'll show you how to use the pictures. So if Beth wrote on 1, 2, 3. If Beth wrote on 3 cards, okay? If Joe wrote on 1, 2, 3, well, Joe still has a lot of cards left over compared to how many Beth did. So to see it, so Beth only wrote on 1, 2, 3 cards, so I crossed out 3 of Joe's cards to equal how many Beth wrote. But he still has all of these left over. So how many fewer cards does Beth write on than Joe? You can look at our numbers and how many cards we had left over. Number 5 says there are fewer white kites than blue kites. Write 2 equations to show, then solve. So there are fewer white kites than blue kites. Let's count how many white kites we have, just the white ones. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 white kites. Let's count how many blue kites we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. So we have 5 white kites and 8 blue kites. It wants us to write 2 equations to show there are fewer white kites than blue kites. So I could take my total number of blue kites minus my total number of white kites, which is how many? 5. And that is equal to, if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those kites. Let me cross off 5 blue kites now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many more of the blue kites am I left with over that I did not mark? I am left with 3 of those blue kites. Now, if I needed to show it a different way, so with addition, how can I show this a different way? What plus what would equal my answer? So I got this equation by taking the total number of blue kites minus the total number of white kites to see how many fewer white kites there were than blue kites. So now, if I took my total number of white kites, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I know that there are 3 fewer white kites than blue kites, and that equals 5 plus 3, the total number of blue kites, which was 8. So there is another way to show it. So what would be the fewer number of white kites? There are blank fewer white kites than blue kites. Last page of our workbook, so page 28, last page of our lesson today in our workbook. Number 6 says Leah has 3 pens. Scott has 6 pens. How many pens do they have in all? How many pens do they have in all? So when I say how many pens, that means I'm going to be using addition for this problem. So if Leah has 6 pens and Scott has 6 pens, how many pens do they have all together? And it wants you to write that addition equation down here and your answer in the blank. Number 7 says there are 7 oranges on a branch. 3 of those oranges fall off, so we can see those oranges falling down here. So it wants me to write my subtraction equation for number 7. So how many oranges did I have total? Minus how many oranges fell off equals how many are left on the branch. Wants to know how many oranges are left on the branch. Number 8 says draw some blue balloons. Draw fewer yellow balloons. How many fewer yellow balloons than blue balloons are there? So if you don't have these colored pencils at home or markers, that's okay. You can just use your pencil. So I'm going to draw some blue balloons. Just some little blue balloons. And then it says draw fewer yellow balloons. So if I drew 1, 2, 3 blue balloons and I have to draw fewer or less yellow balloons, I can only draw 1 or 2 because those numbers are both smaller than 3. Then it says, how many fewer yellow balloons than blue balloons are there? So boys and girls, your number 8 is going to look different. So for however many blue balloons you draw, you are going to use that number. And then for however many yellow balloons you draw, you are going to use that number. As long as your yellow number of balloons is smaller than your blue number of balloons, you will be just fine. So after you draw your balloons, it wants you to write how many blue balloons did you draw, minus how many yellow balloons you drew, and how many are left over. And number 9 says you have 8 apple trees. You have 6 pear trees. How many fewer pear trees than apple trees are there? So if I have 8 apple trees and 6 pear trees, that subtraction equation would look like 8, because I have 8 total apple trees, but I only have 6 pear trees, and they want to know how many more apple trees and pear trees I have. So how many fewer is how our answer is worded. How many fewer pear trees than apple trees are there? So 8 minus 6 would give us our answer, and then you would bubble in the correct answer for number 9.